Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Crime Dawg Podcast with your host and content creator, Johnny FIORICA, whose athletic career peaked in 7th and 8th grade playing CYO basketball. And sit back, relax, and enjoy the show.
Hello, folks. Welcome to the Crime Dawg Podcast. Your host, Johnny FIORICA, 30-year veteran, Rochester, New York Police Department. Just retired after 30 years of service in October of 2023. Sitting alongside me tonight, my trusted co-host, as usual, first on deck, 20-year retired veteran, legendary street cop, undercover cop, SWAT cop, homicide detective, David Simpson. Welcome to the pod.
Thanks for having me, boys.
Next up, served at Flower City 2.5 decades. He worked Genesee Lake, Clinton. He served all over the Rock. Lead negotiator for the RPD hostage team. Currently, self-proclaimed alpha male of this broadcast. Self-proclaimed 1994 Hall of Famer of what? We still have no idea. Jason Blanchard, welcome to the pod, brother.
Thanks, Johnny. Happy to be back. You notice I'm still having technical difficulties. I'm holding my microphone.
It's all right, man. Listen, legendary dudes, like I said last time, from Spittin' Chicklets, man, they are unprecedented, and they hold their mics, and they have no problem with it. I'm sure you'll have no problem at all, too.
If we have the success that they do, then we're doing all right.
Improvise, adapt, and overcome, Jay. I like what you're doing.
Thank you, David. I appreciate it.
Guys, we had extensive text strings on our little podcast string today, along with our producer Danny Agnew and the 4-man team of the Crime Dawg Podcast said we would be remiss if a ruling came out, if a decision came down regarding President Trump's trial. It came down, and so here we are. We are doing what we refer to as a quick or emergency podcast because we would be remiss if we didn't comment on the current president or the former president's situation. Let me start off by quoting my good friend Marvin Patterson, who I worked many years undercover with. Whenever he disagreed with somebody or something, he would say two things. He'd say, "These are trumped up charges in kangaroo court," or he'd say, "Circus must be in town, bunch of clowns." And those two quotes from my good friend Marvin came to me today because that's exactly what's going on in America today. For those that don't know, President Trump was found guilty of falsified business records to unlawfully influence the 2016 presidential election. That's kind of it in sum and substance. You could take a little bit more or do whatever you please with that, but that's pretty much what it is. Here are some irrefutable facts. The FEC, which is the Federal Election Commission, the current president's DOJ, which is Department of Justice, the former DA of New York City, all passed on this case and said, no bueno, no go, we ain't doing it. However, the current DA, Alvin Bragg, who ran his entire campaign saying that he was going to go after Donald Trump, decided to do it and bring up these trumped up charges in kangaroo court during an election year. I don't know how this is happening in America. The whole trial was hinged on two main witnesses. And when I describe these witnesses to you, it's going to sound like a comedy movie, like a really shitty B-movie comedy movie. The first guy is Michael Cohen, who was Trump's former attorney, who's a convicted felon and who literally went to prison and is literally a serial liar. He was main witness number one, and the main witness number 1B was a porn star, Stormy Daniels, who, by the way, owes Trump still $150K and for violating a court order. But anyways, before I pass it off to my trusted co-hosts for their comments, I'm going to give you a quote, and I heard it today from legendary federal prosecutor Andrew McCarthy. Andy said, "The flag of politicized prosecution has been planted today." David, what says you?
There's a lot to say, and there's a short time to say it. Real quick, we're going to start with no other person would have faced these charges if his name wasn't Donald Trump. That's the first problem. So we start there. and we then fast forward to the trial. And if you followed the trial at all, you know that the judge who ran a kangaroo court ran a one-sided trial, was not impartial. He totally leaned towards the prosecution to allow them a lot of room and discretion in what they did and boxed the defense in. And anyone that spent any time in the courtroom knows, and we've all been a part of cases that we brought to court, federal and state, where we have sat there and watched these things unfold. The defendant usually gets more latitude than the prosecution. That's usually, for everyone that's out there, that's usually how it rolls. The prosecution, federal and state, is very reined in, if you will. The defense is allowed a lot more latitude to offer the defense for the person that's innocent proven guilty. That was not the case in this trial. If you followed it at all, every ruling went in favor of the prosecution. Fast forward again, we go to the jury instruction, or go to the jury, where he instructed the jury that they did not have to agree on a single charge collectively. I've never heard that in all of my years in law enforcement, sitting and watching closings and listening to jury instructions. I've never heard someone say to a jury that you don't all have to agree on the charges. I mean, anyone else? I mean, I've never heard that in my life. So here we are. It's obviously a selective prosecution. It's election interference. Full disclosure, I'm a Republican, but I'm not. Before this, I was not a huge Trump guy. This totally swung me. Like, this is such a politicized prosecution that I'm on the Trump train. Like, this can't happen. This can't happen in America. And so I just read that Trump's websites have crashed due to volume of donations going into his coffers. I hope that's the case. This can't happen. I solely am looking at this from the rule of law and the rule of fairness and strategic prosecution of individuals where you target them, especially related to politics, is absolutely cannot happen in the United States. I'll toss it to Jay to see what Jay has to say on it.
I don't think this would have happened anywhere other than New York State, number one, right? I think that we have to be very cognizant of the fact when we weaponize the judicial system to target individuals who are in the political arena, that's a huge problem for our democratic system, right? I've said it before, for what it's worth. I was a criminal justice major. I was almost a political science major. I had a minor in it. It's always interested me. You know, all the politics and all the stuff. Never would have wanted to do it, but it's very interesting to me. And I think that when you are trying to go after a political opponent to knock him out of the box or her out of the box so they can't run. And, you know, Trump was precluded from going to rallies during this. He wasn't able to attend things. And I mean, when you just step back and look at a broader lens of the whole circumstance, it's hard. You know, if you take the two parties out of it or take the person out of it, it's hard to say that this wasn't trying to be done coincidentally in an election year, coincidentally, you know, 6 months, 5 months before an election. You know, and I think people realize that, right? And I think they're upset about it, and rightfully so. And what I think is this is going to backfire, in my opinion. And I think that people are going to come out and they're going to support, quote unquote, the underdog who they feel have been unfairly treated. And you know, we can look at, you know, I don't want to get into a huge political discussion about Biden and his son and laptops and all this other nonsense and
guns
and guns and relationships with you know, the Ukraine and whatever, right? We could go down that rabbit hole. This would be a 4-hour podcast, but it doesn't appear that we're playing with the same rules across the board. That's not justice, right? That's acting with whatever your agenda is in place. And like I said, I mean, I think that this witch hunt, if you will, has, they might have got guilty convictions. I don't even know what that means yet. I guess that's the other thing. Like, what does this mean?
What's the charge?
Well,
what are you convicted of?
Right. And so, again, I think I think a kangaroo court is probably a fair term. I don't know how fair this was. And I guess we'll see what shakes out after this.
Yeah, guys, to summarize what you just said, I mean, our system was built on what they call the inquisitory system, which is you are innocent until proven guilty. This is clearly the accusatory system, where you are guilty until proven innocent. Let's go back for a second. So you got a Alvin Bragg, who is a DA, right? And I'm looking at my notes going, how is literally a DA like Alvin Bragg and Letitia James, our New York State Attorney General, how are they able to campaign on, we're going after the guy, right? We're going after the guy, and we got the guy, let's figure out the crime. If you, me or David, Jay, if you, me or David would have done this in our career, we would have been brought up on charges, federal charges, using the color of authority, using the authority of our uniform to go after like a personal vendetta against a guy, a person, a business, an enterprise, or whatever. But if we were to do this in our career, we would literally be in federal prison right now. And I don't understand how the hell they were able to do this, campaign on it, and then figure out what they're going to charge the guy later once they got elected. That's number one. Number two, New York City's a dumpster fire. I mean, literally their rule of law, or should I say lawlessness, is nothing but a massive dumpster fire. I mean, they allow people to get pushed into the subways. They allow violent, mentally ill, homeless people to walk around and punch innocent women in the face. Actors, actresses, models getting literally assaulted on their streets. And literally in daylight. Yet you have a hero, in my opinion, in Jordan Neely, a U.S. Marine, who was on a subway car in New York City last year. And Alvin Bragg decides to indict him for literally protecting an entire subway car full of people. I mean, it's almost like backwards, bizarro world in New York City, David, what's going on right now. It's disgusting.
Yeah, you hit on a good point. Like, no one goes to jail in New York City, and yet he's got the free time to figure out what he's going to charge Trump with, which still don't know what exactly he's convicted of. I couldn't tell you. And the other thing is, Johnny, when we went into court for like drug cases, or if I went in for a homicide, and I brought Michael Cohen into the DA's office or the U.S. Attorney's office in the Western District of New York, I would have been kicked in the ass so hard out the front door and laughed at for bringing that as a witness that they thought that they were going to prosecute a case with. But yet this is the guy that convicts the former president of the United States. That guy's a joke. I wouldn't trust that guy holding $3.
It's funny that you say that, because they try to use the flip side to that, David. They try to say, oh, well, guys like us, detectives, like cases that we worked where we would utilize informants that were in the dope, gun, and murder game with information. But this is something totally different with Michael Cohen. I mean, he literally is a serial liar. They try to literally put lipstick on a pig, and like Jason Blanchard always says, it's still a pig. Jay, what says you?
Well, I was actually going to go on a little bit of a sideways comment from what you talked about. And New York City, we talked about it has its problems, and it's too bad, right? Because it's still, I think, the greatest city in the world. New York City is a phenomenal city, and I wish that we could get a little law and order back into it. And when you see a jackass like Robert De Niro standing in front of the courthouse holding court, I mean, what a dipshit. It's embarrassing. And if all these people who were going to leave the country when Trump was elected the first time had left, we wouldn't have to listen to their bullshit. Yeah. And I would have been happy if they did. De Niro and Rosie O'Donnell and half of The View, the show.
All of The View.
Right, of course you do. So
all of The View. I'm saying there's no half. All of The View.
He thought you said I love The View.
No, I do not love The View. But you gave it half. I'm like, the whole View sucks.
I thought that show was right up your alley for some reason.
No.
So if all these people who claim to have would leave the country that were so upset when Trump got elected the first time, we wouldn't have to listen to their nonsense the second time. But, I putting a microphone in front of De Niro's face in front of the courthouse, that to me was just, I'm like, my God, this guy you're goodbye, goodbye.
Johnny, one quick thing. Just remember it. Michael Cohen was a convicted perjurer. I've never seen that in 22 years of law enforcement where a convicted perjurer is then used as a star witness in a trial.
Right.
It's not like he's a little shady or he was a drug dealer and you can't trust a drug dealer. The guy perjured himself as a convicted perjurer and they still used him.
Yeah, it's like bizarro world, man. It's totally bizarro world. This kind of leads me to my last point, right? Because they're still trying to go after Trump in Florida, but they're saying that, and I only want to touch on this because of the law enforcement aspect, and obviously we're all cops, but here's the interesting thing, right? So they won't get to this case because Florida won't allow it, not for political reasons, just because they're not fast tracking their stuff like they do in New York City in the Eastern District. But here's something horrible, right? And I don't know if you guys, I'm sure you're aware of it. When they raided Trump's home at Mar-a-Lago in Florida, the federal warrant that they're issued and it's signed off on by a federal judge, they said that the agents that executed that warrant were allowed to use deadly physical force. And they were told not to dress up with any identifying gear that showed that you were law enforcement. Blowing through a door on a warrant is a very dangerous game. Let me say that again. Blowing through a door, which all three of us have done, is a very dangerous game. Your outermost garments, right, should be emblazoned with something like police, law enforcement, FBI, DEA, HSI for Homeland Security, ATF, to make sure that nobody mistakes who the hell you are coming through that door, right? But in a Florida case, all they were going after were documents. That's it. Documents.
The same documents that Biden had at his house.
Yeah, in his garage next to his vet. So they weren't going after like drugs and guns like me and the rest of the guys in this pod when we executed search warrants did. They were looking, in my opinion, they were looking for a different outcome on that warrant. I'm telling you right now, I spent the last 6 years of my career working for the federal government. Let me say that again. I spent the last 6 years working for the federal government on one of the best task forces in America. It was sponsored by the ATF guys, and shout out to my task force boys and girls. But I can't even begin to tell you the limitations that the U.S. government has placed on my former task force that I worked with in the last 2 years. In the last 2 years, meaning inside that Mar-a-Lago search warrant was inside the last 2 years. I mean, they're making the ATF guys on my task force, in a lot of situations, the U.S. government, the DOJ, is making these federal agents or task force guys that have federal authority like we did, where they have literally doing knock warrants instead of no-knock warrants, which a knock warrant means it's knock, identify yourself. Hello, is anybody home? No knock is what we did the majority of our careers because it's safer for everybody involved, blowing through the door and taking everybody into custody in a safe manner, But anyways, I guess when you're going after your political rival, you change the rules for your personal vendettas. I don't know, folks. I mean, David, you got to buckle up. This is getting like the wild, wild west in America.
Well, that's interesting. And one thing people should know about, and what Johnny's talking about, is that the Secret Service obviously is protecting the former president still.
Yeah.
So when you execute a no-knock search warrant and aren't clearly identifying yourself, like that's baiting. Like you're walking someone into, like, what are those Secret Service agents going to think when someone barges into Mar-a-Lago?
When they're
like, you're asking for problems.
Yeah. Protecting the former president.
Right. You're asking for a shootout. You're almost looking for it. It's terrifying.
Yeah. That's why I think they were looking for another outcome. Jay, what says you, brother?
My last thing will be this, and I'm just thinking about it as we talk through this and work through this. I made the statement about weaponizing, the courts stuff to go after politicians and so on and so forth for whatever agendas. It kind of ties into what you said. Like people can think whatever they want in the gutter. That's the beauty of this country. But I don't know how you can make the argument that everything here in New York just was exponentially fast tracked in order for this to get done in an election year.
Funny, wasn't
it? This stuff takes years to go before courts, right? And all of a sudden, this process started, I think, January, whenever it started, and now all of a sudden we have a trial and everything and a verdict by June. I don't know how that happens. And again, when you take a step back and you look at it, it's hard to not see, at least from my end, that there's not dirty politics in play, right? And trying to influence elections or whatever it is, and that's what the scary part is to me. This stuff shouldn't happen. This should be out of politics.
100%. And the same politicians that are playing the dirty game of pool were the same ones that hold our brothers and sisters, especially during the 2020 riots, to this higher standard. It's just disgusting. Folks, we're going to end by quoting former Congressman and attorney Trey Gowdy. He said today, these radical defense attorneys are masquerading as district attorneys. They took a misdemeanor, put a tuxedo on it, and called it a felony. Folks, regardless of your political affiliations, we had some very brave soldiers over the course of the history of our country that fought wars to give you the right to vote. Now, regardless of what side you're on, what political affiliation you're on, this is America. This is democracy. What happened to President Trump was not democracy. But you still have the ability to go vote. You still have the right to pull that lever for whoever you are supporting. And we all encourage you to do that. So listen, thanks for listening to this podcast. Tune in to our YouTube channel, which is Crime Dawg Podcast. And also check out our website, thecrimedawgpodcast.com. Thanks for listening. We appreciate your support. We hope you listen to future episodes. But like my brother-in-law, Frankie Grassi, says, if you can't make it, who cares?